Today I'm going to tell you a story so dangerous it could get a woman killed, in the heart of the savage American frontier, where love was forbidden and mercy was rare. This was a place where soldiers hunted Apache warriors, and where one hidden cabin became the crossroads of fate. It all started with something small, a lonely woman chopping wood, that ignited a war no one saw coming. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Arlen Vale collapsed beside the woodpile, her breath catching under the weight of her swollen belly. For 3 long months, she had split and hauled timber with her own blistered hands, since the day her family turned their backs on her and cast her out in shame. The Arizona Territory had no mercy for the weak, and winter was coming down fast from the mountains. She never saw him until he was there. Kael Tazhin, the Apache warrior who'd been watching her from the ridge for weeks. His dark eyes followed every stumble, every tremble of exhaustion, every moment she pushed herself past what her frail body could take. The settlers feared his kind, whispered prayers when they spoke his people's name. Yet when he saw her fall, something older than hate stirred inside him, something fierce and human. He stepped out from the pines, his shadow falling over her like dusk itself, dangerous, yet strangely comforting. What kind of warrior risked his own life for a woman his people called the enemy? That memory burned in Arlen's mind, like a brand pressed into raw flesh. She could still hear her father's voice echo through the homestead that September morning, each word cutting deeper than any knife. The family Bible lay open on the kitchen table, its leather cover worn smooth by 3 generations of Vale hands. But the page that once carried her birth, written in careful ink, had been ripped clean out. "You're no daughter of mine," Hank Vale had thundered, his face carved from Arizona stone. Her mother, Ada, stood behind him, silent tears tracing her cheeks, her hands gripping the chair for strength. In the 1880s, a woman carrying a child without a ring might as well have carried a curse. "Papa, please," Arlen had begged softly, one hand protecting the small curve of her belly. "I've nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before letting that drifter touch you," Hank spat, turning away as if her very presence burned his soul. "Pack up and be gone before sundown." To the Vales, Wade Crow had been nothing but a worthless wanderer. To Arlen, he had been everything. Warm smile, gentle hands, whispered promises under a sky full of stars. He'd shown up one spring night with a lame horse and a sad story, just long enough to win their kindness and her heart. 3 weeks later, he vanished, leaving behind nothing but lies, and the child she now carried. She packed what little she owned into her father's old satchel, 2 dresses, a faded shawl, her mother's silver brush, and her father's worn gloves. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, bleeding red across the horizon, Arlen Vale walked away from the only home she'd ever known. The abandoned cabin she found 3 miles north had once belonged to the Boone family, before Apache raids sent them fleeing east. Its roof leaked, its door sagged, the chimney cracked. But it was shelter. It was somewhere to hide from gossip and judgment. For 2 weeks she survived on what she'd brought, plus the last hardy vegetables left in the Boone's forgotten garden. But as autumn deepened and the nights grew cruel, she realized sheer will wouldn't be enough. Winter in the Arizona mountains could kill a person who wasn't ready. And she wasn't. The first time she gripped her father's axe, her arms shook so bad she almost dropped it. The blade sank into the pine with a hollow thud that mocked her. By nightfall, she'd made just enough kindling for 2 days. Her hands bled through the old gloves, her back screamed in agony. But she kept going. Day by day, swing by swing, she learned. The axe no longer felt foreign in her hands. It became part of her rhythm, her fight to live. She learned to read the wood's grain, to split it clean, to stack it right so it'd burn hot when the snow came. More than anything, she learned she was stronger than anyone, especially herself, had ever believed. From the ridge above, Kael Tazhin watched the white woman struggle with quiet fascination. He had first seen her 3 weeks earlier during his morning hunt, a small figure with an axe too heavy for her size. He had dismissed her at first, another foolish settler doomed to flee or die when the frost came. But she hadn't fled. Every dawn, she stepped out of that broken cabin. Every day, she raised the axe and fought the woodpile like her life depended on it. He watched her stumble and rise again, watched her belly swell with life, watched her strength burn against the chill of the coming winter. Each time, the spirit feather hanging at his neck grew warm, just as his grandmother, Elder Noya, had told him it would, when his heart found a path he could not ignore. The old woman's voice still haunted Kael Tazhin whenever the wind moved through the pines. The spirits speak through signs and symbols, Elder Noya had told him long ago, her wrinkled hands steady as she tied the leather cord around his young neck. When the feather grows warm, listen. The ancient ones are trying to guide you. For 15 years he had carried the spirit feather, through raids and hunts, through blood and seasons of war that had burned away most of his youth. It had warmed the night before the cavalry ambush near Tucson, the morning he discovered a hidden spring that saved his hunting band, and every day for 3 long weeks while he watched the pregnant white woman fight for her life in the valley below. His people had every reason to despise the settlers who swept across their homeland like locusts. The blue-coated soldiers had burned villages, slaughtered women and children, and driven the Apache from sacred hunting grounds passed down since the world's first dawn. The settlers who followed fenced off rivers that once flowed free and built their homes upon soil darkened by Apache blood. Kael's own family had been torn apart by that same tide of grief. His father, Chief Nantan Koa, had fallen in battle against a cavalry patrol 5 years earlier. His younger brother died soon after, in a raid that won nothing but more mourning. The sicknesses brought by white men took his mother, Enola Waya, and his 2 sisters, Winona and Tea Nech, their bodies too fragile to fight the invisible plague. Every sensible part of him whispered that the woman below was his enemy. Her suffering meant nothing. Her death, even less. Yet the medallion kept growing warm against his chest, and in the whisper of the wind, he could almost hear his grandmother's voice urging him to pay attention. By October, frost dusted the tall grass each morning, and the broken windows of Arlen Vale's cabin rattled under the cold. She had stuffed torn fabric into the worst cracks, but the chill still crawled into her bones like a living thing. The axe she'd used for months had grown dull, its edge chipped and worn despite her efforts with a sandstone whet. Each swing now felt heavier, every log tougher to split. The math of survival was cruel. She needed 3 full cords of wood to last the winter, yet she barely had one. Failure meant freezing to death. And that was not an option. Not while another heartbeat moved inside her. Her body had changed so fast she could hardly keep up. The child kicked and rolled with growing strength, stealing her breath and balance. That morning, she had been hacking at a stubborn oak for an hour. The axe bounced back again and again, jarring her shoulders until her arms went numb. Cold sweat poured down her face, and when the pain hit, it felt as if the earth itself had clenched around her. She gasped, the axe slipping from her fingers, clattering onto the frozen ground. For a terrifying moment she thought the baby was coming, too soon, but after what felt like an eternity, the spasm passed, leaving her weak and trembling beside the scattered wood. That's when she saw him. He stood at the edge of the trees, unmoving, tall and lean, his presence cutting through the morning light like a blade. Even from 50 yards away, she could sense the quiet power in his stance, the strength of a predator who never doubted his place in the wild. His long black hair fell loose around his shoulders, bound back with a strip of leather that caught the pale sun. He wore soft buckskins, worked with beads that shimmered faintly, marking him as Apache. No, as something older, prouder. Arlen's heart slammed against her ribs. Every story she'd ever heard about Apache warriors rushed through her mind: burned wagons, scalped soldiers, women taken and never seen again. Logic screamed at her to run, to grab her father's rifle, to bar the cabin door, but her body refused to move. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or some force she didn't understand, she stayed where she was, frozen between breath and heartbeat. He didn't move either. For a long moment, the world itself seemed to hold still, the only sounds a hawk crying high above and the whisper of wind through the pines. Then, with the silent grace of a mountain cat, Kael Tazhin stepped forward from the shadows and began walking toward her. He had not meant to reveal himself. For 3 weeks he had watched from the ridge, unseen, his duty and his heart locked in quiet war. Until now. Kael Tazhin knew the risk he was taking just by standing there. His people would never understand why he lingered near the cabin of a white woman. Her people, if they caught sight of him, would shoot first and ask questions never. Yet when he saw her crumple beside the woodpile, her face twisted in pain, her breath coming in broken gasps, instinct overpowered reason. The spirit feather at his chest had grown so hot it nearly burned his skin, and in that heat he heard Elder Noya's voice whisper through the wind. Some deaths steal not a life, but the spirit of life itself. He stepped out from the trees. His hands stayed open and visible, his pace steady, unthreatening. He knew well enough what the settlers saw when they looked at an Apache warrior, ghost stories made flesh. The woman's fear was sharp and raw. She pressed herself back against the woodpile, trembling, her breath quick and shallow. He stopped several feet away, lifted one hand, palm outward, the oldest sign of peace on earth. For a moment he thought to speak, to use the broken English he had learned from soldiers and prisoners. But words felt too small for the weight of this moment. Instead, Kael knelt, quietly gathering the scattered wood into a neat pile. His movements were calm, deliberate, as if to say, "I mean no harm." The wood was poorly split, crooked, full of splinters, barely enough to burn through a single cold night. The axe lying nearby was dull as a river stone. He looked at her again. She was younger than he expected, maybe 20. Her light brown hair hung loose, tangled around a face marked by exhaustion and hunger. Her faded blue dress, patched at the elbows and knees, whispered of better days long gone. But her eyes, green like spring grass after rain, held his gaze. Fear lived there, yes, but beneath it glowed a spark of strength, the stubborn will that had kept her alive when most would have given up. Rising to his feet, Kael picked up the axe. He turned it in his hands, feeling its poor balance, the chipped edge. Then, without a word, he set a log upright. In one smooth motion, the axe came down. Crack! The wood split clean, falling neatly to each side. Another swing, another perfect break. Again. Again. Each movement flowed into the next, his body remembering what it had learned as a boy beside Chief Nantonkoa, his father, who had once said, "A warrior who can split wood with rhythm can also split fate." Behind him, Arlen Vale gasped softly, but he didn't look back. He worked until every log was reduced to perfect kindling, stacked in tidy rows like soldiers waiting for orders. When it was done, he placed the axe down gently and turned toward her. Her fear had softened. In its place, something new, a fragile mix of wonder and gratitude. Kael reached into the small leather pouch at his belt and drew out a single blue glass bead, polished smooth and round as a robin's egg. He placed it carefully atop the stacked firewood, then stepped back and nodded once toward her. A silent message. This is a gift, not a trap, not a debt. Then he turned, moving with that quiet grace that belonged to mountain cats and shadows. At the edge of the trees, he paused and looked back. Arlen was still there, staring at the bead as though it had fallen from heaven itself. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, lifted to meet his. For a breathless heartbeat, time stood still. Apache warrior and cast-out settler locked eyes, two lives divided by 1,000 miles of history and hate. And yet, something wordless passed between them. Then Kael melted back into the forest, silent as smoke. The spirit feather at his chest was warm again. He knew what it meant. He would return tomorrow. Arlen Vale sat there long after the sun vanished behind the western ridge. She turned the blue bead in her palm, smooth, cold, glimmering like dawn trapped in glass. The firewood stacked beside her looked almost holy in its perfection. She didn't know what message the bead carried, but deep inside, she felt it wasn't one of danger. It was something else entirely. Hope. Maybe it was meant as a sign of peace, or perhaps as a claim, an unspoken mark that said she and her little cabin now stood under his protection. The thought should have chilled her to the bone. No settler in the Arizona territory ever wanted Apache protection. Such a thing could ruin a woman's reputation, or worse, make her a target for those who hated his kind. But as dusk deepened and the firelight flickered across the freshly split wood, the wood that might mean the difference between life and death, fear wasn't what Arlen Vale felt. Gratitude was. And something even rarer than that. Hope. The kind she hadn't known since the morning her father, Hank Vale, cast her out beneath the judgment of the rising sun. That night, the fire caught fast, burning bright and clean. Heat filled the little cabin, wrapping her in comfort she'd nearly forgotten existed. The baby shifted inside her, as though sensing that something, someone, had changed their world. When she awoke at dawn, she found a rabbit hanging from the branch by her door. Freshly killed, cleaned, still warm from the hunt. No footprints in the hard frost, no trace of the man himself. Only the gift. It became a pattern. Each morning, she'd find some new token of unseen care. Stacked wood when her supply ran low, meat when hunger gnawed too deep. Even her cracked chimney mysteriously repaired with stonework so precise, no mortar was needed. He never came when the sun was high, never showed himself in daylight. But she knew he was near, watching, guarding, like some silent spirit of the wild who asked nothing and gave everything. Her fear slowly gave way to curiosity, then to an odd sense of companionship, lonely, wordless, but real. On the 8th morning, she left her own offering. A small loaf of bread, still warm, wrapped in a scrap of clean cloth. By evening, it was gone. In its place sat a small bowl, carved from pine, smooth as river stone, etched with vines that seemed to dance in the firelight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but what moved her most wasn't its beauty. It was what it meant. Someone had spent hours crafting something just for her, someone who owed her nothing. That night, for the first time since she'd left her family home, Arlen slept deeply. No nightmares of cold or hunger. Only warmth. Only peace. Then came Tuesday morning. Late November. The storm hit without warning. Wind shrieking around the cabin like a living thing. Snow slashing sideways through the trees. By noon, she could barely see the woodpile. The The glass panes iced over from the inside, and frost crept along the walls like reaching fingers. She kept the fire fed, but the heat escaped faster than she could replace it. The baby lay too still inside her belly. That frightened her more than the storm itself. By afternoon, her pile of split wood was nearly gone. The wind howled like a hungry beast outside, burying the world in white. She couldn't risk stepping out there. It would kill her before she reached the woodpile. When night fell, she wrapped herself in both blankets, knowing it might be her last night on earth. The baby stirred faintly under her trembling hands, as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. Then came the sound. 3 knocks, slow, firm, deliberate. No white man would be traveling through a storm like this. Only one soul she knew could survive such cold. A voice came through the wind, deep, accented, steady. "It's me. I have wood." Heart-pounding, Arlen lifted the bar from the door. The storm slammed into her face as she pulled it open. Kael Tazhin stood there, snow in his hair, his arms full of dry, perfect logs. Without a word, he stepped inside, crossed to the fireplace, and began stacking the wood beside the dying embers with swift, practiced movements. Arlen shut the door, sealing out the storm. Her hands shook, not from fear, not entirely, but from something she couldn't quite name. In the flicker of firelight, he seemed larger than life, his presence filling the small space like thunder rolling over the desert. Yet his every motion was calm, careful, respectful. Within minutes, the fire roared again, flooding the cabin with golden warmth. Then he rose, turned toward her, and met her eyes, dark to green, for the first time since that fateful day by the woodpile. "Storm bad," Kael Tazhin said quietly, his accent rough but clear. "You need help." Arlen Vale could only nod. Her throat felt tight, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The warmth returning to the cabin was overwhelming, yet it wasn't just the heat that eased her. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone. Someone strong was sharing her space, shouldering the storm that had nearly broken her. "Thank you," she whispered. Kael reached into a leather pack she hadn't noticed before and pulled out a woven blanket, the likes of which she'd never seen. It was soft beyond belief, wool dyed in shades of red, gold, and deep brown, with patterns that seemed to whisper stories older than the desert itself. "Apache woman make," he said, offering it to her. "Very warm, for baby." Something inside her chest cracked open. She accepted it with trembling hands, not from the cold, but from the weight of the gesture. The wool wrapped her shoulders like sunlight, and the child within her stirred gently, almost as if sensing comfort. "What's your name?" she asked before she could stop herself. He paused, considering. "Kael," he said at last, "means friend in my tongue." "I'm Arlen," she replied softly. "It means princess in Hebrew." A rare smile touched his face, warming the shadows that usually guarded it. "Princess who chop wood, make bread. Good princess. Despite everything, the storm, the fear, the strangeness of it all." She laughed. The sound startled her. It had been so long since she'd heard her own laughter that it felt like music from another life. As the blizzard raged outside, they talked. Slowly, carefully, building a bridge of broken words and patient listening. He spoke of his people's ways, how the ancient ones taught the Apache to live by the rhythm of the land, to hunt with respect, to give thanks to every living thing. She shared stories of her childhood, how Hank Vale had taught her to read from the family Bible, how Ada Vale had shown her to bake bread soft and sweet. Neither spoke of war or blood, or the endless line of graves between their worlds. For that one night, they were simply two souls warming each other against a cold that didn't care about skin or language or tribe. When her baby kicked so hard it made her gasp, Kael's eyes flicked to her belly with wonder. "Strong baby," he murmured. "Fight like Apache warrior." Arlen smiled, resting her hand on the curve of her stomach. "He, or she, certainly has perfect timing. Always awake when I try to sleep." "In my tribe," Kael said softly, "baby who move much before born. Become great leader. Strong spirit. Strong will." The words, simple and sincere, touched something deep in her. From him, a man whose people saw every child as sacred, it carried a weight that no preacher or doctor could give. As the night deepened, they fell into a peaceful silence. Arlen dozed in her chair, wrapped in the warm Apache blanket, while Kael sat near the hearth, keeping the fire alive, never letting the flames falter. When she woke at dawn, sunlight streamed through the frost-glazed window. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in clean, untouched snow. Kael was fastening his pack by the door. "Storm over," he said simply. "You safe now." But as he stepped toward the world outside, the world that named them enemies, panic tightened in her chest. "Will I see you again?" she asked, the words breaking free before she could stop them. Kael paused in the doorway. His gaze lingered on her face, unreadable, calm as the desert at dusk. "Maybe," he said finally. "If you need help." Then he was gone. Only the scent of leather and smoke remained, and the warmth of the blanket that had carried her through the longest night of her life. But something inside her had changed forever. The invisible wall between them had crumbled, replaced by something neither could name, something neither could stop. Outside, the snow was already melting into soft rivulets along the ground. A flash of brass caught her eye near the woodpile. She knelt and brushed away the slush, her fingers closing around a military button, still bright beneath the tarnish. An eagle and shield, the mark of the U.S. Army. It wasn't old. It hadn't been there yesterday. Arlen's stomach turned to ice. If soldiers were this close to her cabin, it could only mean one thing. Someone had sent word to the fort, rumors of Apache movement near her cabin. The Army never ignored such whispers. They would come, thorough and merciless, the way they always did when dealing with what they called the Indian question. Arlen Vale glanced toward the tree line, her breath catching. Somewhere out there, hidden among the pines and shadows, Kael Tazhin often kept watch. Was he there now? Had he seen the soldier who lost that brass button she'd found glinting near her door? The thought chilled her. If the Army suspected Apache riders in these hills, patrols would double. Maybe they'd even set up a post nearby, and if Kael was discovered, he'd be shot without hesitation. And she, God help her, would be branded a traitor, a woman who'd lain with the enemy. That afternoon, as she patched her worn dress by the fire, Arlen caught sight of 3 riders approaching from the south trail. Their pace was steady, official, men on duty, not neighbors stopping by. Her heart sank. She recognized 2 of them instantly. Marshal Clay Vance, tall and stiff-backed, his gray hair combed neat as a sermon. His deputy, Jeb Maddox, the same young man who once tried to court her before Wade Crow had come into her life. The third man was a stranger, dressed in Union blue. The brass on his jacket gleamed sharp and new in the sunlight. The same kind of button she'd found that morning. Arlen rose, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. She opened the door before they reached it, forcing a polite smile. Better to meet them head-on than look afraid. "Miss Vale," Marshal Vance greeted, tipping his hat with a false politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "This here's Captain Eli Hart from Fort Apache. He's got a few questions for you." Captain Hart looked barely older than a boy. Clean-shaven, polished, his boots still too new for the dirt of the frontier. He dismounted with military precision, scanning everything: the stacked wood, the chimney, the yard. "Miss Vale," he said evenly, "we've had reports of Apache signs nearby. Tracks, hunting remains, maybe more. Have you seen anything unusual?" Arlen forced herself to meet his gaze. "Tracks, sometimes," she said carefully. "Deer, elk, maybe bear, but I wouldn't know Apache tracks from any others, Captain." "What about gifts?" Jeb Maddox cut in, his tone sharp with something personal. "Anyone leaving things for you? Food? Firewood?" His smirk made her skin crawl. Someone had been watching her. Not Kael. Someone from town. They'd seen the stacked wood, the mended roof, the small mercies that weren't her doing. Her stomach tightened. "I've managed on my own," she said quietly. "Learning as I go." Captain Hart walked the perimeter, inspecting everything with a soldier's eye. His fingers brushed the firewood, each log perfectly split, stacked with precision. He frowned slightly. "Clean work, uniform cuts, takes experience to split wood like this." "I'm learning," Arlen repeated, though the words came thin and unconvincing. Vance dismounted and crouched near the steps. "Captain," he called, pointing at the ground. The men gathered, and Arlen felt her blood run cold. In the damp earth, softened by melting snow, a single print stood clear: a moccasin track. "That's Apache," Hart said grimly, touching the edge of the print. "Fresh, maybe 2-3 days old." He turned to her. "Miss Vale, this is serious. If Apache warriors are moving through these parts, your life's in danger." "I haven't seen any," Arlen lied, her throat burning. "Maybe not," Maddox said with a slow, poisonous grin, "but maybe they've seen you. Maybe they think you're worth keeping around." The filthy insinuation hung in the air. Arlen's cheeks burned, not from shame but fury. "That's enough, Jeb," Marshal Vance snapped, though his eyes lingered on her belly with the same unspoken judgment. "Miss Vale, you'd best think about coming back to town. It's no place for a woman to be alone, especially in your condition." Her condition. The words hit like a slap. They knew about the child, and they were already whispering their own stories. "I appreciate your concern," Arlen said, steadying her voice, "but I can take care of myself." Captain Hart stepped closer, his tone gentle but heavy with authority. "Ma'am, sometimes taking care of yourself means knowing when to let others protect you." Outside, the cold wind carried the faint echo of a hawk's cry across the ridge. Arlen's eyes flicked toward the forest, where she knew Kael Tazhin might be watching. For his sake, and hers, she forced a calm smile and said, "I'll think about it, Captain." But deep down, she already knew her answer. "Miss, you don't understand what these savages can do." Captain Eli Hart's tone was cautious, his words shaped by authority and fear. "We've seen the aftermath at other homesteads." He hesitated, glancing toward her rounded belly. "Let's just say, Apache warriors don't draw lines between soldiers and settlers. When the men finally rode away, promising to increase patrols, Arlen Vale sat by the cold hearth, staring at the brass button hidden in her pocket. It felt heavier than iron, a small piece of metal carrying the weight of 2 worlds about to collide. As dusk gathered over the pines, she stepped to the edge of the clearing. The air smelled of snow and smoke. Her voice trembled when she called out softly, "Kael, if you're out there, please, I need to speak with you." He appeared as though the forest itself had breathed him out, silent, sure, half shadow, half spirit. His face was solemn. In his hand, he held a torn scrap of blue cloth, cavalry fabric, frayed where it had caught on a branch. They know, he said simply. They suspect, Arlen corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. Suspicion isn't proof. Kael's dark eyes held hers, fierce and unblinking. In white man's world, suspicion enough for hanging rope. The truth of it settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Arlen understood completely. Their connection, their shared secret, made them both outlaws now. If the army caught him, he'd be executed. If they found out about her, she'd be branded a traitor. Or worse. "You should go," she whispered, her heart aching even as she said it. "Go back to your people. Pretend none of this ever happened." Can't. The single word carried the weight of a vow. He lifted his hand, the spirit feather glinting faintly in the dim light. "It grows warm when I think of leaving. My grandmother's spirit says the debt, not finished." "What debt? You don't owe me anything." Kael took a slow step closer, and in the fading light, his eyes held something that made her chest tighten. Not fear, not pity, but something deeper. "Not debt to you," he said softly. "Debt to life, to the child coming, to something greater than Apache, or white man." The words hung in the evening air like prophecy. Arlen felt the truth of them in her bones. Whatever had bound them together had grown beyond kindness or attraction. It was now something neither could name, yet neither could walk away from. "They'll come back," she murmured. "More men, more questions. They'll be watching this place." Kael nodded, his jaw tight. "Then we'll be ready." "Ready for what?" His faint smile was grim. "For the choice." The choice came sooner than either expected. 2 mornings later, Arlen woke to the sound of horses thundering toward the cabin. Dust and snow kicked up on the horizon. She had maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes to decide whether to keep lying or to stand tall and face whatever was coming. By the time the riders reached the clearing, she was waiting on the porch, her hand resting over her unborn child. Protective, defiant. Marshal Clay Vance reined in his horse first, flanked by Captain Hart and a half-dozen armed men. "Miss Vale," the marshal called, voice carrying the weight of authority. "You'll need to come with us. Orders from Fort Apache." "And if I refuse?" Captain Hart urged his horse forward, his jaw tight. "Then we'll have to assume less charitable reasons for your stay out here." The threat in his tone was clear. Around them, soldiers shifted in their saddles, rifles across their knees. Arlen looked at every face. Some she knew from town, others strangers with cold, hard eyes. The moment of choice was gone. "I'll need a few minutes to pack," she said quietly. 5 minutes, Vance replied. "And, Miss Vale, don't even think about signaling your Apache friend. We've got sharpshooters in the tree line." Her heart lurched. Was Kael out there? Was he watching this unfold, hidden among the pines? She forced herself not to look toward the forest. Inside the cabin, she gathered her meager belongings, a shawl, her mother's silver locket, a small pouch of keepsakes. Each item felt heavier than before, carrying the life she was about to leave behind. Yet beneath the sorrow, something else stirred. A fierce, stubborn resolve that seemed to rise from within her child. When she stepped outside again, her chin was high, her spirit unbroken. Captain Hart dismounted to help her onto a spare horse. His touch was formal, not cruel. "You're doing the right thing, ma'am," he said softly. "Those savages would have turned on you eventually, no matter what spell they've got over you." Arlen said nothing. Her silence was her rebellion, stronger than any shouted defiance. As the posse turned toward the open trail, the sound of hooves echoed through the valley, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a hawk's cry answered, sharp, wild, and free. They rode toward town with her in what they called protective custody, though Arlen Vale knew it felt more like a quiet arrest. She turned once in the saddle, her hand resting on her stomach, and looked back at the small cabin, the place that had been her refuge and her prison, her teacher and her sanctuary. High above the clearing, near the line of dark pines, a lone figure watched. Even from that distance, Arlen could feel Kael Tazhin's presence, the weight of his gaze, the pull of a promise that neither of them had spoken aloud. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something that would change them both forever. The town of Dustmere Ridge had grown like most frontier settlements, from necessity, not ambition. A saloon, a church, a general store, a jail, and a few crooked houses, all clinging to the edge of the wild. Arlen hadn't seen it since the morning she'd left her father's home in shame. Returning now under the guard of soldiers and lawmen drew every whispering eye in town. They placed her in a small room above the general store, where Jeb Maddox stood watch outside her door with a rifle and a sense of duty too small for his pride. "No leaving without escort," Marshal Clay Vance had said flatly before leaving her there. The room was narrow but clean, with a single window overlooking the muddy main street. Through it, she could watch the comings and goings, the gossiping townsfolk, the creak of wagons, the metallic clang of horseshoes on stone. And she could feel their stares, their stories being written about her before they ever heard the truth. Ruth Boone, the storekeeper's wife, brought her meals, bread, stew, and judgment served in equal measure. "Poor soul," she murmured each time, her eyes drifting to Arlen's swollen belly. "Those savages, they must have done unspeakable things. But you're safe now, among Christian folks." Ruth's pity hurt worse than accusation. To be seen as a victim stripped Arlen of everything, her will, her choices, her dignity. The child she carried was not a mark of shame. It was the one part of her life she had chosen freely. On the third night, Arlen awoke to the crack of gunfire echoing through the valley, sharp, fierce, and close. From the rhythm of the shots, she knew it wasn't a skirmish between settlers. It was soldiers, the roar of rifles, then the deeper thunder of hunting guns. The echoes rolled across the mountains, then fell silent as quickly as they had come. The next morning, Captain Eli Hart appeared at her door, his face grim. "Miss Vale," he began, his tone formal but uneasy. "There was an incident last night. Apache warriors attacked your old homestead." Her hands went cold. "Was anyone hurt?" "2 of them down. We found the blood trail. None of our men hit. Looks like they came for you. Thought you were still out there." He paused, studying her carefully. "One of them fits the description of a man we've been tracking. Big fella? Scout? Knows the land better than most. Dangerous sort." Her breath caught. "Did you capture him?" Hart shook his head. "No. But if he's wounded, he won't get far. We'll find him soon enough." After he left, Arlen sank by the window, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, where Kael might be hiding, bleeding, or gone. The thought twisted like a blade in her chest. She pressed her palm over her heart and whispered, "Please, Kael, don't die." But as the day passed with no news from the patrols, a quiet strength began to rise in her. Kael was Apache, born of the earth, taught by the wind, hardened by survival. If anyone could vanish into the wild and live, it was him. That night, she lay awake, listening to the heartbeat of the town. Boots fading from the saloon, dogs barking in the distance, shutters creaking in the wind. Beneath it all, she thought she heard something softer. The faint whisper of moccasins on dirt, a sound like breath moving through pine needles. When dawn came, she found something resting on her windowsill, a tiny wooden carving of an eagle, wings spread wide as if caught in flight. It was carved in the Apache style, precise and alive with spirit. Her throat tightened. "Kael," He was alive. He had found a way to reach her. The carving was more than a message. It was a vow, a promise that their story wasn't over. Arlen closed her fingers around it, and at that moment the baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if answering her hope. She smiled through her tears. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it, not as a prisoner, not as a woman marked by shame, but as someone who had chosen her own path. And so the plan to escape began to take root. It didn't come from desperation, but from resolve. Arlen began studying everything: the rhythm of the guards, the changing of shifts, the way Jeb Maddox made his rounds every 2 hours like a clock wound too tight. She learned that at midnight, when the watch changed, there was a small window. 15 minutes when the back alley behind the store lay unwatched. Ruth Boone went to bed early and slept like the dead, her room too far in front to hear the creak of the back stairs. So the plan formed. Quiet, simple, desperate. On Thursday night, when the moon rose full over the rooftops of Dustmere Ridge, Arlen Vale would disappear into the dark, toward the only place her heart called home. The night was cold, the kind of November cold that crept through skin and bone until it reached the soul. That was exactly what Arlen Vale was counting on. The cold would keep folks inside their homes and away from the alleys of Dustmere Ridge. When midnight came, she was already awake, lying still beneath her thin blankets, breathing slow and steady as if in deep sleep. Outside her door, Jeb Maddox made his rounds, boots clicking against the wooden floorboards. By the time he came back again at midnight, the bed still held the shape of a sleeping woman, the blankets and pillows carefully arranged to deceive him. But Arlen was long gone. She was 2 miles out of town, guiding a borrowed mare through a shallow creek bed, the icy water masking her tracks. Every gust of wind bit through her coat, and her swollen belly felt heavier with each breath. The baby moved restlessly beneath her ribs, as if sensing the danger pressing in from all sides. In her coat pocket, the skyhawk carving, Kael Tazhin's gift, pressed warm against her palm like a heartbeat. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, voice trembling through the night air. "We're going to find him." The mountains loomed like shadows against the stars. Somewhere beyond them, Kael was out there, wounded, hunted, maybe waiting for her. 5 miles north of town, near a small spring, her horse suddenly shied, jerking sideways. Arlen slid from the saddle and crouched, peering beneath a fallen log. There, half hidden in the mud, was a smooth river stone etched with faint markings, Apache signs. She couldn't read them, but she knew what they meant. Kael had passed this way. She followed the creek deeper into the mountains, the trail growing steeper and the night colder. Twice more she found the marked stones, each one a quiet message guiding her forward. The hours bled together. By the time the first blush of dawn touched the sky, her fingers were numb, and her body screamed for rest. Then she saw it, a thin wisp of smoke curling up from a canyon ahead. Hope and fear surged through her chest at once. She urged the tired horse onward. The Apache camp lay hidden in a narrow box canyon, invisible from the open plain. 3 men sat around a low fire, their faces lifting toward her in surprise. 2 reached for their weapons, but the third froze. Kael. He stood slowly, his movements careful, his skin pale beneath its bronze tone. Even from her saddle, Arlen could see the tightness in his jaw, pain he refused to show. He was alive. The sight nearly brought her to her knees. "Arlen," he breathed, voice rough but full of emotion. "You should not have come." She slid awkwardly off the horse, one hand braced against her aching back. "I had to. They were keeping me prisoner. They were going to raise my child to be ashamed of us. Of you. The two other men watched silently, their dark eyes sharp, weighing her words. One was young, maybe Kael's age, his expression quick and restless. The other was older, with silver streaks in his hair and a face carved from years of leadership. Kael spoke rapidly in Apache, his tone low but urgent. The older man responded, voice calm yet heavy with warning. Then, after a long silence, he rose and approached Arlen. "I am Nantan Wikasa," he said in firm, accented English. "Kael's uncle, brother to his father, Chief Nantan Koa. You bring danger to our people." Arlen met his gaze without flinching, though her heart pounded against her ribs. "I bring only myself and my child. I ask for nothing but to be with the man I love." A flicker of surprise passed through the elder's eyes, but his expression remained stern. "Love between an Apache and a white woman brings death to both. The soldiers will come. They always come." Kael stepped closer, his hand instinctively moving to shield her. "Then let them come, uncle. I will not let them take her." Nantan Wikasa's eyes narrowed, studying the defiant warrior before him, his nephew, wounded but unbroken, and the pale woman who had risked everything to reach him. "You speak as a man who forgets what war costs," the elder said quietly. "But perhaps the Ancient Ones have a reason for keeping you both alive." The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. For the first time since her escape, Arlen felt the faint stir of warmth, not just from the flames, but from the knowledge that she had found him again. Whatever came next, the soldiers, the danger, the wrath of two worlds, she was ready to face it. Because Kael Tazhin was alive, and that meant there was still hope. "They will come again," Nantan Wikasa said quietly, his gaze sweeping the canyon. "More soldiers, more rifles, and more hate." Arlen Vale lifted her chin, her voice steady despite exhaustion. "They're already coming. My being here doesn't change that, except now they can't use me as their excuse to start a war." The old warrior studied her for a long time, his sharp eyes taking in the mud-stained hem of her dress, the trembling in her legs, and the weight of the child she carried. Something in his expression softened. "You are brave, white woman," he said finally. "Foolish, but brave." He turned to Kael Tazhin, whose anxious eyes never left her. "And my nephew's heart," Nantan continued, "is written plain on his face for all to see." They spoke briefly in Apache, low, rapid words that carried the rhythm of decision. Kael's shoulders relaxed in visible relief before he hurried to Arlen's side, just as her knees nearly buckled. "My uncle says you can stay," Kael murmured, guiding her down beside the fire. "But not here for long. Too close to town. Soldiers will find us." "Where will we go?" she asked, voice trembling from exhaustion. "South," he replied without hesitation. "Across the border. In Mexico, Apache and white can marry. No soldiers, no laws to keep us apart." The word marry hung in the cold mountain air like a promise whispered to the gods themselves. Arlen met his gaze, dark eyes filled with both danger and devotion, and saw a future carved by risk, but built on something stronger than fear. "Is that what you want?" she asked softly. "To marry me? Even knowing what it'll cost you?" Kael's smile was small, pure, and without armor. "More than breath, more than water, more than anything this world holds." At that exact moment, the baby kicked, hard enough to make Arlen gasp. Kael froze, wonder flooding his face. Around them, the mountain stood silent and eternal, as if bearing witness to a love that defied both blood and law. 3 days later, when Arlen's strength had returned, and Nantan's scouts found a safe trail south, they began their journey toward freedom. But fate had other plans. At dawn on the second day, Arlen felt a dull ache deep in her back. At first she told herself it was the rough saddle, the endless motion. But soon the pain sharpened, rhythmic, relentless. When she doubled over in the saddle, Kael was beside her in an instant. "Baby comes," he said, voice tense, stripped to essentials. "Need safe place, now!" Nantan scanned the ridgeline, his instincts sharp from years of battle. "There," he said, pointing toward a formation of massive boulders beside a small creek. "Shelter, water close, hidden from sight." Dasan Koa, the younger warrior, spurred his horse ahead to scout the place, while Kael lifted Arlen gently from her mount. She could barely breathe through the contractions. "Too early," she gasped. "It's too soon." Kael brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand steady despite the worry in his eyes. "Apache child strong," he said softly. "Comes when ready, not when white man's calendar says." The shelter was perfect, a natural cave formed by leaning stones, hidden by brush and shadows. A small stream trickled nearby, cold and clear. They spread their blankets across the sandy ground, transforming the space into a sacred circle of warmth and survival. As Kael and Dasan worked, Nantan crouched beside her, his expression grave but not unkind. "White woman," he said, "I have helped many Apache mothers bring life into the world. Never a white woman. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Arlen interrupted, forcing steadiness into her voice. "This child was conceived in love and guarded by the ancient ones. It will come into this world strong." The old man studied her for a heartbeat, then smiled, the first time she'd seen him do so. "You speak like an Apache woman," he said softly. "We will bring your child safely." The hours that followed blurred into one long, sacred storm of pain and will. The cave echoed with her labored breathing, the crackle of the fire, and Kael's murmured reassurances in Apache and English alike. He never left her side, his hands strong and steady whenever she faltered. The warriors moved with reverence, understanding that what was happening before them was not just birth, it was an oath between worlds. And when the final cry split the morning air, echoing through the canyon, it was followed by another, higher, smaller, full of life. Kael Tazhin bowed his head, tears glinting in his dark lashes. Arlen Vale lay back, trembling and exhausted, cradling their child against her chest. A bridge between two peoples had just been born, fragile, breathing and utterly defiant of everything the world had said was impossible. Kael's voice came low and steady, half in Apache, half in English, words meant to calm, to guide, to anchor her through the pain. His hand never left hers. Around them, Nantan Wikasa moved with the sure, practiced hands of a man who had seen life begin in 100 hidden places. He readied the sacred cords and soft woven cloths used for generations of Apache births. Dasan Koa kept the small fire alive, its smoke whispering low enough not to betray their presence to the wind. When the final moments came, Arlen Vale was surrounded not by doctors or midwives, but by a quiet, ancient strength, the kind of wisdom that belonged to a people who had been bringing children into the world long before towns had names or borders. "Baby coming," Kael said, his voice tight with emotion. "Almost here, almost ready." The pain became everything, fierce, blinding, eternal, and then suddenly it broke. The world was filled with a single sound, the sharp, defiant cry of a newborn. Arlen gasped, tears flooding her eyes as Kael lifted their child, his strong hands trembling with awe. "A girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Perfect, my little Apache princess." She was tiny but strong, her skin kissed by both her parents' bloodlines, dark hair already curling against her head. When Kael placed the baby against Arlen's chest, something inside her shifted. A peace deeper than exhaustion, a love larger than pain. This child wasn't just theirs. She was proof that love could bridge worlds built on fear and hate. Nantan Wikasa began the blessing. He chanted softly in Apache, the old tongue rising and falling with the rhythm of firelight. He tied the birthing cord into intricate knots meant to shield the child's spirit through her life's journey. The ritual felt foreign to Arlen's Christian upbringing, yet every word, every motion felt sacred and right. As the sun dipped behind the ridges, painting the sky in crimson and gold, the little family huddled together. Arlen nursed her daughter while Kael watched silently, his face softened by a kind of wonder she had never seen in him before. Outside, Dasankoa kept watch while Nantan cooked a modest meal. When the fire's crackle softened, Arlen spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What should we call her?" she asked, gazing down at the small miracle in her arms. Kael's brow furrowed thoughtfully. "Apache name or white name?" "Both," Arlen said. "She belongs to both worlds. She deserves both." He studied the baby's face, as if the answer were written in her tiny features. "Nita Saka," he said finally. "It means eternal blossom, something that grows beautiful and never dies." Arlen smiled through her tears. "Then Nita it is. And for the white name, hope, because she is hope, for us, for both our worlds." "Hope Nita," Kael murmured, tasting the name like a prayer. "Strong name for a strong heart." That night, hidden deep within the Arizona mountains, their world was small but perfect. A fire's glow, a mother's heartbeat, a father's quiet tears. Tomorrow would bring danger, soldiers, and the long road south toward Mexico. But tonight, they were just a family, a man, a woman, and the child who bound their worlds together. When dawn broke 3 days later, mist curled low over the valley. The Apache village appeared like a mirage. Wickiups mixed with old army tents, arranged in wary circles of defense. Arlen rode in, cradling baby Nita close while Kael walked beside her, his hand resting gently on her knee. Dozens of eyes followed them, curious, cautious, some filled with distrust. Nantan Wikasa had sent Dasankoa ahead to announce their arrival. By the time they reached the central fire, the tribal council had already gathered. At least 20 men and women, warriors, elders, and mothers hardened by years of struggle, watched in silence. Arlen dismounted carefully, her body still weak from birth, and stood beside Kael. He spoke first, his Apache words low and urgent, explaining what had happened, who she was, who the child belonged to. From the circle, an elderly woman rose. Her silver hair, braided and adorned with small beads that shimmered in the sunlight, framed a face carved by time and wisdom. "I am Sialatea," she said in careful English. "Grandmother to Kael, keeper of the old ways. You bring a white child to an Apache village. That is not common." Arlen met her eyes squarely, her voice steady. "I bring my daughter to her father's people. I ask only the chance to raise her among those who will teach her to be proud of all she comes from." Siala stepped closer, peering down at the baby asleep in Arlen's arms. Her expression softened. "She is beautiful, strong spirit, like her father." She glanced toward Kael, pride and worry blending in her dark eyes. "But a white woman among us brings danger. Soldiers will come." Arlen straightened her shoulders. "They're already coming. My being here doesn't change that. It only means I won't be their prisoner when they arrive." At that, a young warrior stepped forward, his voice sharp in Apache, a challenge, a warning. The air between them grew tense. And just like that, Arlen realized that though she had survived the mountains, the hardest fight, the one for her child's place in both worlds, was only beginning. The village erupted in argument the moment Kael Tazhin finished speaking. Voices clashed in the smoky air. Sharp, emotional, filled with fear and frustration. Though Arlen Vale couldn't understand the Apache words, she didn't need a translation. She could feel what they meant. Anger, suspicion, weariness, and something else beneath it all. The heavy exhaustion of a people who had lived too long on the edge of survival. Then Sialatea lifted her hand. The noise died instantly, like a campfire smothered in sand. When she spoke, her tone carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't ask for obedience but commanded it all the same. "The white woman stays," she declared in English, for Arlen's benefit. "Her child carries Apache blood. The mother belongs where the child belongs." Her gaze fixed on Arlen, sharp, searching, unblinking. "But you will not remain a stranger here. You must learn our ways, speak our tongue, live as one of us, not as a white woman living among us." From that moment on, Arlen gave herself completely to the task. She learned how to grind maize, how to soften deer hide with smoke and stone, how to weave baskets whose patterns told stories older than any written word. Her tongue stumbled over Apache words at first, the sounds foreign, the grammar wild and free compared to English. But slowly, the language began to settle into her mouth like something it had always known. And in the heart of the camp, little Nita Saka thrived. The women of the village passed her from one loving pair of arms to another, cooing and laughing as if she were born to every one of them. No one called her half-blood. They called her blessing, hope, the spirit child who bridges two skies. Kael's standing among his people didn't falter. It grew. Many saw his choice to stand beside Arlen and their child as a mark of courage, not weakness. He had chosen love over fear, loyalty over pride. For a few precious weeks, peace settled over them like morning mist. But peace, in that land, never lasted long. 3 weeks after their arrival, Dasankoa returned with grim news. A cavalry patrol was sweeping through the territory, questioning settlers, searching every camp, hunting for a white woman said to be traveling with the Apache. When the tribal council gathered again, the firelight caught on tense faces. Arlen was permitted to sit near the back, her grasp of the language now strong enough to follow most of what was said. The debate was fierce. Some argued that harboring her endangered them all. If the soldiers found this place, they would bring death and fire. Others countered that she had earned her place here, that turning her over would shame the tribe before the ancient ones. Finally, Sialatea rose to speak. Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of the ancestors. "This woman did not come as thief or conqueror," she said. "She came as a mother, searching for a home for her child. She has learned our words, honored our customs, and shown respect to our people. Her child carries Apache blood and Apache spirit, and the soldiers will come whether we hide her or hand her over. The white man's eyes see an Apache village and bring death, no matter what we do. Better we stand for something worth defending than live with the shame of betrayal." Silence followed her words. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. There was no vote, only agreement, the kind that came from the soul rather than the mouth. That night, as Arlen nursed Nita inside the small wiki-up she now shared with Kael, the reality sank in. Her presence might bring ruin to these people who had welcomed her. Yet she also felt, for the first time in her life, what it meant to truly belong. "Are you sorry?" she whispered, watching Kael clean his rifle by the firelight. "Sorry that you chose to protect me? To face all this?" Kael paused, his eyes meeting hers. "There's an Apache saying," he said quietly, "better to die on your feet than live on your knees. We stand for something worth dying for." He reached out and brushed his thumb along her cheek. "That's the only way to live, Arlen Vale." Outside, the camp moved with silent precision. Men checking weapons, women gathering supplies, children guided to the safety of the inner circle. They were ready, as they had always been. Inside their small shelter, one family lay together in fragile peace, surrounded by a tribe that had chosen love over fear and honor over survival. At dawn, the first sound came. Hoofbeats, steady and disciplined, cutting through the cold air like drums of fate. Kael touched her shoulder gently. "Take Nita," he whispered. "Go to the center. Stay with the women." Through the pale light of morning, Arlen could see them, dark shapes moving like shadows through the mist. The Apache warriors of Nantan-Wikasa's camp were taking their positions. The storm was coming, and this time she was ready to face it beside them. The warriors of Nantan-Wikasa's camp moved like shadows, swift, silent, and precise. Each motion was deliberate, practiced. These were not startled villagers caught off guard by the thunder of approaching horses. They were survivors, men and women who had lived too long beneath the gunmetal sky of war not to recognize its sound. From beyond the tree line, a commanding voice rang out, sharp, practiced, and cold. Captain Eli Hart. "We know you're sheltering a white woman and her child. Send them out, and no blood needs to be spilled. But if we have to come in after them, this camp will be treated as hostile." The words cut through the morning mist, echoing against the canyon walls. Inside the village, Arlen Vale felt Nita Saka shift restlessly in her arms, the baby whimpering as if she could sense the danger pressing in from every direction. Around her, Apache mothers drew their own children close. Their faces were carved with quiet dread, the kind born not of fear, but of memory, of too many mornings that had begun like this, and ended in fire. Through the smoke from the morning fires, Sialatea stepped out of her dwelling. Her back was straight, her gray braids streaked with silver light, her every step unhurried. She had faced soldiers before, and she carried herself like a woman who bowed to no man, not even one in uniform. When she reached the edge of the village, she raised her chin and spoke in firm, measured English, her voice carrying over the dry air. "White soldier speaks of woman and child," she said, every syllable clear, deliberate. "But he forgets whose ground he stands on." Behind her, Kael Tazhin stood ready, rifle in hand, his jaw tight with resolve. The Apache warriors had taken up defensive positions along the ridge, high ground that offered cover and visibility. Their movements were silent, the kind of silence that came from generations of fighting for survival. Arlen watched from the heart of the camp, her heart pounding. She could see Captain Hart's silhouette, the shine of brass buttons, the glint of sunlight off a drawn saber. He called again, louder this time. "Turn over the woman. She doesn't belong here. Neither does her half-breed child." The insult drew a low growl from one of the younger warriors, Dasan Koa, who gripped his rifle tighter. But Nantan-Wikasa lifted a hand, signaling restraint. "Let him talk," he murmured in Apache. "Words are wind. Steel speaks last." The air grew heavy, still. Smoke from the cook fires drifted between the two forces like a thin veil, blurring the line between peace and war. Inside the circle, Arlen clutched Nita tighter, whispering a prayer she barely remembered learning. Half to her God, half to the ancient ones whose names she'd come to know. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "No matter what happens, hold on." Outside, Sialatea stood like stone against the rising sun. "You bring war to our home," she said evenly, her gaze steady on the captain. "But you will not find the woman you seek here. You will only find people ready to defend what is theirs." For a long moment, the world held its breath. The soldiers on their horses, the Apaches behind their rifles, the woman in the shadows clutching her child. And then, somewhere beyond the ridge, a single horse snorted. A rifle bolt clicked into place. The stillness of dawn fractured like glass. War was about to speak. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you. Truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.